And Robert says only voters of the town of Sandgate can speak. I knew that wasn't going to go over well.
Power and authority are my middle name. And if I can lord it over 120 people, it's much better than lording it over any member of my family.
I really enjoyed the task and the position, and which I think surprises some people. A lot of people come and say, you know, why are you doing this? I can't imagine doing this.
You can't very well hold a town meeting where you're doing the town's business if it's going to be WrestleMania 10.
It's still important to them, and it's important to the process too, for people to get together and talk to each other.
The first couple of years, I probably knew 95% of the people personally. This past year, if I knew half.
And so he keeps on continuing, being more adamant. What he doesn't know, and the rest of the room knows, is that Harold Beebe was sitting next to me.
Turned to the camera and I said, for those of you who are at home, get out here to the municipal meeting and be a part of democracy in action.
We are gathered together in civil assembly. We gather as a community in the oldest sense of the word. We gather to come together and try to make decisions about what is right and about what is wrong. Let us advocate for our positions, but not at the expense of others. Let us remember that there is an immense gap between saying, I am right, and saying, I believe I am right. And that our neighbors with whom we disagree are good people, with hopes and dreams as true and as high as ours. And let us always remember that in the end, caring for each other in this community is of far greater importance than any differences we may have. Having said that, here are the rules.
The previous moderator had moved out of town, and about 2 weeks before the town meeting, the select board decided maybe they ought to think about finding somebody to run the meeting. And a couple of friends of mine approached me, and I said, well, yeah, I guess I can do it. I'd been to a couple, and I thought it was something fairly easy, and I said, yeah, I could do it, and that's how I got started.
And what, you were approached because of your experience, or what do you think compelled them to ask you? Because they thought you would say yes?
I think that probably played a large part in it, maybe. In all the years I've been doing it, nobody has wanted to run against me for the position. It is an elected position, as you know. But all joking aside, I think they thought I had the skills to do the job. And that's one of the reasons I've stayed, because I've learned more and more about how important the job is, and that there are skills required to do the job. And as I say, nobody's fired me yet. So, well, I grew up in New Jersey, except that I spent summers here from the age of 4 until I went off to college. My mother was a teacher, and we had the summers off, and we stayed here. My parents eventually retired up here, and we're now in that home. So I've really been associated with Sunderland since the time I was 4, and I won't tell you how long that is. So I grew up with local people, and I've maintained those relationships, and so the town has always been important to me. And I was in higher education as an administrator for my work life, and now my husband and I have retired up here, and we've been up here full-time since 2000.
What skills do you think are necessary to do the job of town moderator?
First of all, the ability to get up in front of people and maintain your cool, so to speak, which I had experience doing as a manager. I'm sure you've had it too. And then the ability to understand some of the techniques that are used. For instance, as all town meetings, public meetings in the state are run according to Robert's Rules of Order. And you need an ability to understand those, but at the same time use them in the most effective and fair way possible as you lead the people of the town to do the business of the town. Robert's Rules is pretty rigid in terms of all of that.
Yeah.
And I start the meeting, as all moderators should, and I think they all do, with a list of the rules and regulations that we'll be using. So people are told about them and they have an opportunity to ask about them if there's any questions or concerns. It is critical that the moderator be impartial throughout the meeting, but at the same time, if I can see a way to help them get around a question or move on forward through something, I can stop and say, you know, there is a way of doing this that will, according to the rules, that will allow you to do thus and so and whatever. And I try to watch out for those kinds of things too. And so that the role of the moderator is to help the town do the business, not to prevent them from doing business.
That's a good point.
Yes.
Yeah. In the Secretary of State's handbook and some literature that I read, there was a sentence describing the role of the moderator as a referee. And how do you feel about that terminology?
I suppose it's technically true in that if one side is overstepping, going against the rules, you have to rein them back in and bring them back to the rules. It's not a referee in any sense of the word in terms of taking sides or suggesting that what they're trying to do isn't correct. The townspeople, the voters, are able to do what they want to do. Majority rules in the end. But the moderator's role is procedural, strictly procedural. So in terms of a referee, in terms of whether the procedure is going properly, yes. In terms of the issues at hand, no.
Is there ever a time where you had a strong opinion about an issue or another where you found it difficult to maintain your role, and how did you handle that?
Well, it was sort of on the tip of my tongue. Sometimes you just know that if you could only tell them this particular fact, it would change the way somebody was trying to, you know, get at a point. But I can't do that. And I've never, as far as I know, I've never slipped. But it is hard sometimes to not want to say, but. And there are times when I have sort of nudged the town clerk and say, you might want to bring up a particular fact. It's always a fact. It's not opinions. Opinions are definitely not allowed.
Yeah, yeah.
During town meeting. And I also try to reflect that to some extent during the year, so that I am not seen as any kind of a, when I have an opinion on a town subject, I try not to do it in such a way that I become a flashpoint for any negativity in town.
Yeah. It makes for a long day, so how do you prepare for it? Do you have a routine?
I just try to rest during the afternoon, and I recognize that everybody coming to the meeting has been working all day, or many of them have probably been working all day. And one of the things that I find not necessarily difficult, but that I have to watch out for is, and I announce at the beginning of the meeting, the voters have to stick to the issues. And sometimes sticking to the issues can veer off rather easily into a personal, not even an attack, but just some personal remarks that are not appropriate. And it's sometimes difficult to find the line between allowing people to speak their minds and allowing them to veer off into some kind of personal remarks that are inappropriate. And I think that that happens sometimes because people are just tired, and it's, you know, it's been a long day for everybody.
All remarks must be addressed to the moderator. And you must be recognized to speak. You can't just decide to stand up and put up your hand and assume you've been recognized. But I do want to say something about this. There's a certain amount of back and forth that's allowable, if you will, or that I will allow, because it's almost impossible for you to ask. You could ask a question to get an answer, and that might be the end of it. But 9 times out of 10, you need to ask a follow-up question. So there's a certain amount of that kind of back and forth that you can do between yourself and one of the select board members if necessary. But it can't just go on and on and on. Your speeches must be confined to the merits of the issue. You can't make personal remarks or question the motives of others. And last but not least, you can challenge my rulings. use that power cautiously too. But sometimes people just wind up getting in these long drawn-out conversations with one of the board members, and that just can't be.
I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for an answer to a
Right.
question. If there has not been an answer presented, at that point you would ask for a follow-up.
Right, and what I'm going to do, especially with you, is ask if you've had your question answered, okay? And I can do it with everybody, just so, and if not, then you need to either phrase it better or somebody's got to, up here, got to do something about that.
There are some issues that have come up in Sunderland, and will probably come up again or yet, that can be controversial, and people are concerned about them, and that's when things get, a little heated sometimes, and it's very hard to be even-handed sometimes. You worry about making sure you're even-handed.
Yeah, and how it's going to go. And some years perhaps are more worrisome than others.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Has anything changed, or is it sort of a
No,
constant?
there's percentage-wise a fairly small percentage of voters come out. We get a participation rate of about 75 to 80 people out of 600 and some registered voters. So some would say that's a small percentage. We would certainly like to see more people participating, but there are all kinds of reasons why they can't or don't. So I would say the participation has been rather steady, which says to me that it's an important function for the town. And I mean the townspeople recognize that it's something that, they need to do and they need to participate in.
Many of the towns struggle to get participation in these volunteer boards and committees, and it's an issue that I think many towns are facing. So how do you have any suggestions for getting people involved or moving that forward? 'Cause there is some concern, that...
Well, as a matter of fact, Sunderland has 6 positions open at the moment. Hopefully after Monday's meeting it's only 5. But it is a problem. Some of the positions require a lot of time. Others don't necessarily require a lot of time, but people aren't familiar with them. And they're not, and they think it may require more time than they're willing to give. And part of our problem in Sunderland, and I'm sure it's not unique, is that a lot of people don't come out to the select board meetings or the school board meetings. They're not very well attended. I think your televising of them has helped. I know people watch them on GNAT because we'll hear about it. So that I think has been helpful. And I think to some extent, if they feel that the people who are in office are doing a halfway decent job, then there's nothing to worry about. Okay?
Right. They're doing it okay.
They're doing it okay.
Yeah.
Or if there's one particular issue
Yeah.
they're concerned about, they'll manage to raise it somehow or other at a board meeting or at town meeting. But I think it's just people are busy. They're working, they're running around with their families, they just don't have time for this.
Yeah. Do you think that town meeting in Vermont will exist in 50 years or 100 years?
Yes. I think it's too important to people, be it a large majority or a small majority. I think it's too important and it's too fundamental an American institution. I mean, town meeting in Vermont existed before Vermont was a state. So, it's a major tradition, and I just think it will.
So what advice would you give the newcomers?
The Vermont League of Cities and Towns does a moderator workshop. They call it Town Meeting Tune-Up. Every year, right before town meeting, a couple of weeks before town meeting, they get the participation of about 100 moderators. There are always new ones there. There are us old folks who've been doing it for a number of years, so you get a nice mix. Part of it is an opportunity to review new state law that may affect town meeting. There's a very good review of Robert's Rules. which I always pick something up at. And then in the afternoon, there's kind of a question and answer period where you learn all kinds of fascinating things about how to handle various types of questions and things like that. I'm not sure you can do this without attending one of those things. I wish I had known before I did it the first time. On the other hand, if I had known, maybe I would have run screaming the other way. But it's a great reinforcement for you. And you know, as with so many things, you know you're not alone. And it's I would say that that's a requirement.